Buckley. There we go. Buckley Sinonokins, Sepkeka, Onchi Pati, Gusesha Annette Clark Gi, Kai Modoc Niki, Jason, Guhi Swax Modoc Niki. How are you doing, everyone? Thanks for coming today. My name is Annette Clark. I am not Modoc. Jason, my husband, is Modoc. I always like to warn people that because I often like to use the pronouns we and us, as with most people, when you take on a position, it becomes you, you become it. And this tribe definitely makes you want to be a part of it. Today, I'm going to just share a presentation, a little slideshow with you about the history of the tribe, but just give you a little introduction to start with. One of the first things my husband told me when we started dating was he was Modoc. And over the years, he's mentioned many, many times different things that his grandma taught him this, or his grandma mentioned this. So little things were strung throughout his childhood about being Modoc. Even though they weren't a powwow tribe, they didn't really gather, they didn't have a lot of functions, but they were there. And it was significant to his identity to make sure people knew he was Modoc. So for me, getting to be a part of this is very, very important and heartfelt. Over time, you know, it just has become me to want to represent this tribe. Not that I am one of the Modoc people, but I want to represent their story. And I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and that makes it even more invested in my goals of teaching this story and making sure she has her identity of being Modoc as well. As I began to plan out this presentation, though, I kept asking myself, what do I want people to know? What do I want them to walk away with? And I kept coming back to everything. There's nothing I want to leave out, but we have an hour, and hopefully I can stretch this to an hour, but there's so many details. There's no way I can tell you everything. So I'm going to hit the high points, and with Indian history, the low points as well. But that's what got us here. So we have to share it all. The first thing I want to share too is a little bit of background on myself. I was a public school educator for 24 years, and I knew when I left teaching, it would be to do something for the greater good of society. And as I was dwindling down with my teaching career and knowing it was time to get out, because I was a special ed teacher, and you know that burnout hits pretty good. Well, I made 19 years in special ed, but it was time to go and share my knowledge and use it in a different way. And the position here at the tribe came up. And so in June of 2019, I became the Director of Education and Culture and Tribal Registrar for Modoc Nation. And I am humbled to be here and honored as well. So that's why I am here sharing the story of the Modocs. And here we go. Hopefully you will enjoy it, and hopefully you will be able to walk away with more knowledge than what you came with. So I'm going to try to share this PowerPoint with you, and I'm just going to talk through it. That way you don't have to view my face the whole time, and it'll be a little more relaxing for all of us. So we'll see what we've got. So there we go. Okay, are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes, we see it, Annette. There you go.
Okay, all right. Well, as I said, I'm the Director of Education and Culture, so it is my joy to get to share the history of this tribe as often as I can, and to anyone who listens, because the more people that know it, the more we can prevent something like this from ever happening. Because like many other tribes, this is a tribe who suffered removal. But it has a little more story than that, than some other tribes do have. So let me get here. Sorry, I'm a little wonky at the moment, just getting going with this. So the Modocni, Moklaks, which would be the Modoc people, originated in Northern California and Southern Oregon, what is now known as Modoc County. Many people may be familiar with the Modoc National Forest. Well, that was their homeland. So you can see from the map, we were on the, and once again, there's that pronoun of we, even though I'm not the member. We're right along the border of California and Oregon. There were other tribes. The Shasta tribe was also kind of in this in-between area. And so we share some similarities in activities that happen, but very separated. They were somewhat of nomadic people. They originated, I have Mount Shasta in this picture because that from their creation story, they came from Mount Shasta. The creator was there. So that is their signifying point. Like when you go on that pilgrimage to the lava beds, most people always get that picture of Mount Shasta because that is the beginning. That is where the Modoc people came from, according to the creation stories. There are discrepancies on size of the tribe varying from about 500 up to a couple thousand. It just depends on what document and what books you read. The Modoc people lived in small bands that would come together to support one another as needed. They weren't necessarily known as having chiefs, but they would have a speaker. So oftentimes within their bands, they would come together if it was due to a fight or support for one another. The person who was most educated on that topic would become the speaker. And so everyone would listen to him. So then the role would switch depending on what was being dealt with. So if somebody else from another band had more knowledge, that would be shared, then he would speak. They were gatherers. They were hunters. They would gather wakus and camas root, which was a staple of their diet. They fished. They hunted waterfowl, mule deer, elk, as well as small prey that was available to them. The Modoc women were known for their intricate baskets made from tule reed, which have a lot of similarities to cattails that we see around here. They had water all around them and mountainous terrain as well. These people knew how to survive with very little and preferred that way of life. Their language was unique in comparison to the other nearby tribes, except for the Klamath tribe, which they had a lot of similarity with. And we still to this day share back and forth. Right now, the Modoc people lost a lot of their language due to their removal, and we'll talk about that later. But the Klamath is a support for us because the language is so similar. And so that is a definite connection we want to keep a hold of. Trail really was a detriment to the Modoc tribe. When the Applegate Trail opened up, as you can see, it cut through the homeland for the Modoc people. So once the white man started coming to their lands, looking for their riches and new property, it brought a stop to many of the practices because they didn't have that space to hunt because people were there. So this brought the first contact, for the most part, of white people to the Modocs, and they really struggled with that, as most people would. Overall, they didn't really have a lot of fight to begin with, but due to people not understanding other people's practices, it did become an issue. With the Oregon Trail and with the Applegate Trail, it brought in a lot of people. So adjustment had to happen pretty quickly, and that didn't always pan out. So although they didn't have a lot of trouble with the white people coming, there were murders of settlers by the Pitt River tribe who were nearby, and they killed several people. Well, it ended up that the Modoc tribe blamed for that. One of the bands was blamed for that, and that really kind of developed an attitude towards the Modoc people right from the beginning. And it wasn't even them that caused the situation, but they did catch the blame. And this would kind of affect them throughout history over time. During this attack, they, in a response to it, The American militia then retaliated on the Modoc people, and they came into a village that they thought had caused this attack on the pioneers, and they killed about 41 Modoc people, including the women and children. Captain Jack, who later becomes the leader of the Modoc band, he survived this, but he lost most of his family in this attack. To try to end this, the Modoc chose to attack the next whites they encountered. They decided we're going to get even. We're going to show who we are. We're going to say no more. And so in September of 1852, the Modoc attacked a wagon train of about 65 men, women, and children on their way to California. One of the people escaped to a settlement in the Willamette Valley and told about the attack. So of course, this spread very quickly. And he may have exaggerated, he may not have, but he really expressed how mutilated the women and children were, and that they were scattered more than a mile along the lake shore, and that their wagons had been plundered and burned. So this became known as Bloody Point. And this was the catalyst that really created the image of the Modoc people becoming so violent and so vicious, when in reality, they were really loving people. They wanted to take care of their own. They wanted to stay to their own. But with the trail opening up, they didn't have that choice anymore. The next major event within their story has to do with Ben Wright. In another round of retaliation for Bloody Point, the militia led by Ben Wright, the Indian fighter, they killed 41 Modoc people at a peace parley. So under the white flag, they were brought in to speak, and it wasn't a peaceful setting. Sconchin John, the brother of the Modoc chief Old Sconchin, was one of those who escaped. Ben Wright, known as the Indian hunter and killer, boasted of this. The killings under the precedence of the peace flag would never leave Captain Jack's thoughts, and this comes out later on in their story. In 1864, the United States and the Klamath, Modoc, and Uhuiscan band, which was about 1,000 Indians, mostly made up of Klamath, signed a treaty by which they ceded millions of acres of lands to the U.S., which was the Klamath Reservation. So this is within the boundaries of the present-day Oregon now. Under this treaty, the Modoc, with Chief Sconchin as their leader, gave up the lands to Lost River, Tule Lake, and Lower Klamath Lake, which were regions in California. Then they moved to the reservation in the Upper Klamath River Valley. In return of this treaty, the Indians would receive the provisions, food, blankets, clothing for many years so they could establish themselves. But as we know, these often didn't happen the way they were written. So Klamath and Modoc tribes were not typically supportive of each other. They were known to fight amongst each other. And them being on a reservation together did raise some concerns, but it was agreed upon because they thought they could make this work. But their difficulties started in the very beginning. The Modoc were taken advantage of. They were the smaller group, so they were kind of pushed back. They were able to be bullied because of not having the number of people in their tribe. So they were given something and then it was taken back away. They were allotted this amount of food, but they never quite got everything they were supposed to be given. They lost a lot and they just didn't accept this. They weren't okay with this. So Captain Jack at that point, which his Modoc name is Kinpwash, he had trust with the U.S. government a little bit at that time, and he went to the agent Knapp and requested that they be moved. And Knapp's response was, go somewhere where there aren't Klamath. So they did. They moved within the reservation to the Williamson River Valley. But once again, they were bullied. They were pushed out. They were pushed into smaller corners. Their food was taken. They would cut lumber and the lumber would be taken. They just couldn't deal with this. This wasn't okay. Captain Jack wasn't satisfied with how the people were being treated. So he went to Knapp again and said, you know, we want a reservation at the Lost River. And of course that didn't occur. Now, later on, Agent Meacham would support this idea, but it was never approved and never took place. So on April, we believe 25th or 26th of 1870, Kennewash repudiated signing the treaty. And with Old Scontian, 341 others left the Klamath Agency to go back to the Lost River, to their homeland. So over the next 2 years, the Modoc people tried to return to their previous lifestyle, but with the influx of Europeans being there, their lifestyle had changed. So they lost hunting ground, they lost fishing areas, they lost their ability to gather without people interfering. So when they would come onto the lands and the Europeans may have cattle grazing, then of course the Modoc people were considered as encroaching or trespassing. They truly didn't understand that, excuse me, as they didn't understand the ownership of land. This was everyone's land, but they needed to be able to survive. So at times they were able to get along with newcomers, but mostly it wasn't the case. So not understanding one another, their daily practices often led to the violence on both sides. During this time, the government will continue to try and convince Captain Jack and his people to return to the reservation. And over time, many people did. But the life at the Klamath Agency wasn't the best. And those few did stay with Captain Jack and refused to go back. So now here at the Lost River, this is their homeland. It's truly where they wanted to be. Captain Jack wanted this to be their reservation, pleaded with the government to have this place. This is where they could survive. This is where they should be. And the star on that map is about the estimate, just general direction of where we're talking about here. So the Battle of Lost River occurred on November 27th, 1872, when Superintendent O'Neill requested commanding officer at the Klamath to furnish sufficient troops to compel Captain Jack to move to the reservation again. So on November 28th, 40 troops left Fort Klamath for Captain Jack's camp on Lost River. The troops, reinforced by citizens from Linkville and by a band of militiamen, arrived at Jack's camp on Lost River, about a mile above the immigrant crossing, which is now Merrill, Oregon. And they arrived on the 29th. Wishing to avoid the conflict, Captain Jack agreed to go to the reservation, which often he would refuse and then make them more comply to what he would propose. So I'm not coming there, but you can come meet me here. So keeping a little bit of control in a sense. So he did agree and went, but the situation became tense when Jackson demanded that he would surrender weapons. Although Captain Jack hadn't really fought with the army, he was alarmed at the command of surrendering those weapons, but he did agree. The rest of the Modoc warriors began to follow in his lead. And then an argument erupted between Scarface Charlie, one of the Modoc warriors, and one of the lieutenants of the 1st Cavalry. They ended up drawing their revolvers and shot at each other, and both missed, which is surprising. The rest of the Modoc scrambled for their weapons, and there was a brief fight, and then they started to flee towards California. After driving the remaining Modocs from the camp, Jackson ordered the retreat to await their own reinforcements. 1 soldier was killed, 7 wounded, and the Modoc lost two and had 3 wounded. So after this, while they are trying to scramble to get away, another group of Modoc, which would be Hooker Jim, and some others retreated from this space and went towards the lava beds south of Tule Lake. Hooker Jim was a little more aggressive in the fight, and he was quite angry with the government, even more so than Captain Jack. And during his journey, over the 2 days of the 29th and 30th, ended up killing, he and his group, 18 settlers. So this really fueled the feelings towards the Modoc people as being so aggressive fighters. The accounts really vary regarding the first clash. There's one version that says the soldiers and the militia had gotten drunk in Klamath Falls and had arrived at the camp disorganized and were kind of a mess and basically made more issues than what they really helped. There was another version that the warriors held their ground and the fight continued on. There's a little discrepancy there. There were other stories that the women and children were fighting, but really that's been proven inaccurate because they know that the women, and from other documents that the women and children were actually in the canoes headed towards the lava beds trying to get away so they could hide out. There's also a report that one of the Modoc warriors fired a shot accidentally, and that triggered the troops to begin fighting. The official report that was turned into the military, though, concealed that really the whole situation was handled badly by the military, and Captain Jackson actually admitted this later on. Captain Jack had boasted that in the event of war, he and his band could successfully defend themselves in the area of the lava beds on the south shore of the Tule Lake. So that is where the Modoc retreated and took advantage of all the lava ridges, cracks and depressions and caves for their protection for this fight. At the time, the 52 Modoc warriors occupied the Stronghold. Tule Lake was bounded by a nice source of water, which really helped their survival. So now moving on to January 17th of 1873, the troops had advanced on the Stronghold. So many little battles occurred back and forth, and there's a lot of stories written about this. But just due to time, we're gonna kind of move over those and hit the major events of the story. So in January of 1873, they advanced to Stronghold. The soldiers really couldn't see any of the soldiers. There was a lot of fog covering the lava beds, but this also showed their ability to fight. They knew how to have coverage. They were strategic fighters and warriors. So a general retreat of troops was ordered at the end of the day, but during this fight, the army had lost 35 men, and Captain Jack lost no casualties. So of those warriors, of those Modoc members in the lava beds, there were very few warriors in there. It was women, children, elders. So they had all gone to hide. There were a few ready to fight, but they all became warriors throughout this war. So here's just a little view of the Stronghold, and you can see in these spaces, the picture to the top left is just kind of like, there is a cave within that, and they would hide in these areas. This is where they'd stay throughout this war. They had different places within the lava beds. There's miles of this area. It is very rough terrain, and just to picture having to live in this and fight to survive is amazing. The picture on the right at the top, you can see a circular formation, and this is where they would actually create these and lie inside with their guns up on the rocks. So the soldiers coming across the lava beds could never see them, but the guns would be there ready to fire. And this is how they had so many casualties of the wars, of the soldiers. Okay. Let's see. So, I lost my track. Hang on just a second. Okay. I'm just off one. Okay. So on April 2nd, so we moved up a couple months after this fight, little battles went on. The commission and Captain Jack met in the lava beds. midway between the Stronghold and Gillam's camp, which was in the map on the previous screen. At this meeting, Captain Jack had 3 proposals. One was to complete pardon of all Modoc, the withdrawal of all troops, and the right to select their own reservation. So it wasn't asking a lot. The Peace Commission proposed back, Captain Jack and his band go to a reservation selected by the government, and that the Modoc guilty of killing the settlers be surrendered and tried for murder. After much discussion, the meeting broke up with no resolution. The Modoc began then to turn on Captain Jack slightly. He still hoped for a peaceful solution, but Sconchin John and Hooker Jim were putting pressure on Captain Jack to kill the Peace Commission. They believed that if the Americans lost their leaders, then the army would leave. They would shame Jack for continuing negotiations, and eventually Jack agreed to the attack on the commission if no progress was made. So then on April 5th, Captain Jack requested a meeting with Meacham. Accompanied by John Fairchild and Judge Roseborough with Frank and Toby Riddle, which Toby Riddle happened to be Captain Jack's niece, they served as interpreters. Meacham met Captain Jack at the peace tent. Now, like I said, was about a mile east of Gillam's camp, and the meeting lasted several hours. Captain Jack had asked for the lava beds to be given to them as a reservation, which you would think in the situation would be an easy choice. I mean, there's not a lot they can do with those grounds. The only thing worthy of use would be the waterways, but this was still not okay. The meeting ended with no agreement again. After Meacham returned to camp, he sent a message to Captain Jack and asked that he meet the commission at the peace tent on April 8th. While delivering the message, the Modoc interpreter, Toby Riddle, learned of the Modoc plan to kill the peace commissioners. On her return, she warned the commissioners. So as they were starting for the peace tent, the signal tower on the bluff at Gillam's camp received a message and said they had seen 5 Modoc warriors at the peace tent. About 20 armed Modoc were hiding among the rocks nearby. They realized that the Modocs were planning the attack and decided to stay at Gillam's. Reverend Thomas insisted on arranging another date for a meeting with Captain Jack. So on April 10th, the commission sent a message asking for Captain Jack to meet him at the peace tent the following morning. On April 11th, General Canby, Alfred Meacham, Reverend Thomas, and Ellis Dyer, and Frank and Toby Riddle as the interpreters met again with Captain Jack, Boston Charlie, Bogus Charlie, Sconchin John, Black Jim, and Hooker Jim. After some talk during which it became evident that the Modoc were armed, General Canby and Captain Jack, informed Captain Jack that the commission could not meet his terms again until orders came from Washington. So basically just kind of passing the buck. Angrily, Sconchin John demanded the Hot Creek for a reservation. Captain Jack got up and walked away, but Modoc Barnco Charlie and Slow Lux, armed with rifles, ran forward from hiding. Captain Jack then turned, which was the signal to fire. His first shot killed General Canby. Reverend Thomas fell mortally wounded. Dyer and Frank Riddle escaped. Meacham was seriously wounded, but Toby Riddle ended up saving his life by yelling out to the Modoc warriors that the soldiers were coming. And so they broke off and left. The efforts for peace ended once they killed these commissioners. Canby's Cross marks the site where Canby and Thomas died. There's a lot of issue over this marker there in the lava bed area. Lots of times it is being desecrated because they're memorializing the end of these people, basically. And it's a struggle between the Modoc people and other people. From April to October 73, Captain Jack and his band were held in prisoners of war of Fort Klamath. Other Indians, even Modocs, actually aided in Captain Jack's capture, which is a little rough to take. Some of them believed they were doing the right thing to try to regain peace, because peace was never going to be gained if the war continued, and they were scared to lose their whole tribe. So some people did side with the military to help Captain Jack get captured. While they were in Fort Klamath being held, the rest of the members who were not leaders, who were not considered the true warriors, were held as prisoners of war in the camp there at the fort. So the actual warriors who were captured were held in chains at all times. They were held in very confined spaces. Their health decreased quite quickly. Captain Jack was known to have diminished quite significantly through his imprisonment there. The interviews and the trial took place, as did the punishment. So what's unique about this situation is that these leaders were the only Indian leaders who were ever charged with war crimes. So other leaders fought, but they were never charged with a war crime. These were the only ones. And this was done very purposefully. The Modocs had cost the government a lot of money. They had cost them a lot of men, and they wanted to use them as symbols of, this is what will happen if you fight the government this hard. And so once they did their interviews, the trial was done and they convicted them. And the 4 leaders you see below, Captain Jack, Sconchin John, Black Jim, and Boston Charlie, were all hung. Their graves are still at Fort Klamath. The picture below of the headstones is a recent picture I took on it while I was there last year. And this is the gravesite, although their remains are no longer there. The rest of the tribe were then exiled to another location, which was not told because they didn't want any interference. And so they were exiled as prisoners of war. Right after the trial, all the Modoc people who were identified as being a part of the war were loaded up onto cattle cars, like in this picture. They were not allowed to take anything. They were only allowed to have the clothes on their back. They had no items from their life. They weren't able to say goodbye to any of their family members who may not have been a part of the war, that were able to stay at the Klamath agency. So they basically walked out, or they were escorted out empty-handed. They were chained and they were put on these cattle cars. Now remember, this is in the winter, almost winter, very cold, no provisions. This was a
Hey, everybody. I think we're frozen for a few minutes. Just give us a few minutes and we'll try to get Annette back on. Go ahead, Annette.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there.
No worries.
Where we were. Let's see. Okay, are we back on track?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So yes, so Cora Pickering, she was one of the younger ones where we have a firsthand interview of somebody who experienced this exile. And not having a lot of documents for this era, this was very important for us. She is actually in our Modoc cemetery, and her son played a key part in the getting the tribe re-recognized later on. So once the members were sent to, or were exiled, they were sent to Baxter Agency, or Baxter Springs, which was the Quapaw Agency, I'm sorry, right on the border of Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri. And they were not prepared for them by any means. So they arrived, they didn't have housing, they had to scramble to give them the provisions just to survive initially. They were then quickly moved, well, not so quickly, but they were then moved to Ottawa County in Oklahoma, which became the Modoc Reservation. Once they were there, though, they became victims of what they called the Quaker Indian Ring. And what happened was the Indian agent had family working, and he created a monopoly that would use their money at inflated rates for food. They would give them poor food, they would give them rotten meat, soured flour, charge them extreme high prices for those things. And the Modoc people really couldn't argue. As time went by, though, different parts of the government did get involved. And so interviews were done to find out what was really going on here. And Bogus Charlie was one of the original warriors who he had become recognized as very intelligent and a friendly person to the white people. And they actually interviewed him. And part of his interview is on the screen for you. He expressed very well that, you know, they were not made for this climate. His people were dying because of the struggle they had to adjust to climate, to culture. They had lost all the foods and the ways of life that they had practiced, and they really didn't know how to survive here. So they had lost a lot of people, and that was a definite struggle for them. Let's see. Just make sure I'm on my right track after I lost the connection. So in 1891, they were finally given allotment. And if you look at this map on the right, this is their actual allotment map for the ones who had survived. And there were only 68 left to receive allotment, but a lot of those were actually born after removal. So the originals were already gone. If you look on the Oklahoma map, this area way up in the right-hand corner, there's a little bitty piece of that, and that is the Modoc territory. So once again, small tribes, small land, but they've come back and they are still here. So had it been not for the gifts and money and the support of different agencies and organizations, they wouldn't have survived. General Sherman, woman or child alive, so the Modoc would have become a reality, but it's not, we're proud to say. Assimilation at this point was in full force, and denial of their Modoc identity was key to survival here. The newspapers had really shared the stories. They had gotten back to this area that the Modoc were such a vicious group of people, such violent fighters, and people here were fearful of them upon their arrival. And there are interviews talking about them coming off the train and what they looked like, and the way they perceived these Modoc prisoners was shocking, really, because they were coming off in shackles, but people still felt the threat of them. The Modoc and Klamath tribes were terminated from federal supervision in 1954. Years later, after all the tribes in the northeastern corner of Oklahoma banded together to establish the Intertribal Council of Northeastern Oklahoma, at that time, the Modoc formed a non-federally recognized tribal government. So Cora Heyman, that I mentioned earlier, Cora Pickering Heyman, had a son, Bert, and he is the one on the left of this picture, this group picture. He was a key player in working on getting that recognition. He and Dutch Walker, who was the the grandson of Long Jim, who was known as the youngest warrior of the Modoc War. They both worked together to try to get the tribe recognized. They were granted federal recognition in May of 1978. This recognition made the tribe eligible for federal assistance. At that time, Chief Wallace became the first chief after reinstatement, and he still retains that title today. So from surviving to thriving, the Modoc Nation, which used to be Modoc Tribe of Oklahoma, now has 518 members across 24 states. The business started with 3 employees and now has 38, along with several tribally owned businesses. With the focus on financial survival all those years, cultural practices and language were not something that was focused on. And with such separation from the homeland, it was a struggle to retain it. However, with the means of travel and technology in our current age, that is something we are focused on recapturing. Education has always been a huge priority for the tribe, and they issue significant scholarships for our tribal members. Their goal with education is to make sure our students walk out of college with a degree and no debt. And that is something to be very proud of. They also have a nice focus on the environment. We established Red Cedar Recycling in 1996, and that provides services for the whole area. They have since gained many grants to develop our environmental effort for air quality, to aid families, to get energy studies in homes and things like that. So that has continued to be a focus. We've also really poured efforts into the mental and physical health forefront for the tribe. We want to make sure our people are healthy. And so 2 years ago, we were able to begin opening up the doors for Lost River Treatment Center, which is our opioid treatment. We also have received a grant over the last 1.5 years to establish our healing house, which is youth and family services to offer for mental health. Within this, they are the first group to offer supervised visitation in our area. So that is something that is very needed and super excited to have. We are also working right now on getting ready to build through CCDF grant funding a 24-hour daycare center that will be open to all the area. And there is no other daycare that's open around 24 hours a day. So that is something that is very needed as well. So our efforts to support the community just continue because we want to work together and take care of one another. So Modoc Nation's still here, still growing, and still fighting for what's right for their people. We recently had a premiere. We had a documentary created by Sexton's Creek. Gosh, I'm having trouble speaking. Sexton's Creek Productions. We did a lot of filming on site here in Oklahoma as well as in the homeland. This story really is telling the extensive story that I've shared with you today in a much better way. We were able to bring in some musical artists that really tuned into our story. One of the theme songs we're using is from Mary Youngblood, a flute player, and she actually wrote or created a song for the flute as a tribute to Captain Jack and the Modoc people. So we were thrilled she allowed us to use this in our documentary. We haven't released this to the public, but it is in the works. We will be doing that soon. So if you're interested in that, you can go on our website and there's a link for you to actually click on to get updates on when it will be released. but it was pretty moving to watch it. We were pretty excited, and we're hoping that this will really help share the Modoc story to the world. I want to thank you, Sipkeka, for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed what I've shared.
Thank you, Annette. That was an excellent presentation. Really appreciate you taking the time to be on here with us today. We're going to take a few questions, and I have one first, just to talk a little more about your documentary, because I know that was such a big part. And, when you and I and Paige had talked a few months ago, that was going to be a big thing to finally get the history out about the Modoc Nation. And you said you were able to go back to the homelands in California. Had you been back there before? And, how did that feel being back there?
I have never been there. I had been to California, to Temecula for a conference the year before, but I had never been able to go to the Modoc homelands. It was very moving to be there. It was also very sad because I know so many of the members have never got to be there themselves. So we have many elders that have never got to put their feet on their homeland. And so for me, I approached it as I was their eyes. And so I tried to take a lot of pictures that they would want to see, not necessarily that I wanted to put out to the public, but what do our members want to connect with? And that was pretty neat to keep that in my brain at all times of, no, I'm serving people by being here. We went out to do the filming the first day with the crew, and we were joined with the cultural director from Klamath Tribes, Perry Choctaw, and he helped us with the story because he knows a lot more of the story than I do. And so he joined us for that and walked the lava beds with us. And that was really neat. But then the crew and I got to go back 2 days later and just spend some time where we could take our own pictures and go at our own pace. And I was there about 4 hours, and it was a whole different experience that day. Trekking through those lava beds and really trying to look at what they had to experience to live like that for that amount of time. It was moving, really. I had trekked around there for 4 hours and I was totally exhausted. It was hard to lift my feet at the end, and I was trying to hurry and not make them wait on me. And I thought, I'm in hiking boots and it's kicking my tail to get through these lava beds. So that was moving. And then the pictures I showed in the PowerPoint, those were some of the pictures I had taken, and seeing those circular formations and thinking, this is how they fought a war right here. And yeah, it was a moving experience. I've heard a lot of people say that, when they go to the lava beds, they feel different things, and it's very emotional. And I can say I did feel that, not even being as connected as a lot of people are.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's intense. But I'm glad you got the opportunity to do that. And I'm excited to be able to watch the documentary when you release it. And, I've learned so much in the course of your presentation, and I thank you so much. And I had my own question too. And I encourage everybody that's in attendance to shove your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. Leanne and I are looking at both. But I had a question as an archaeologist, and I know we've got a lot of archaeologists in attendance here today, and I'm going to be a bit selfish in that respect and ask you the question of, and to give your opinion of why you think it's important for archaeologists to work alongside tribal nations and tribal people.
Well, I mean, me coming from an education background and not having tribal studies in my background at all, I need that support. Any agencies that we can work together for the better good of the tribe, then that's what we want to do. We're pretty unique here where we're located because there's 9 tribes right here in this county. And with those 9 tribes, as they began to assimilate once they were removed to this location, of course, they started crossing over within tribes. And it's hard sometimes to distinguish what is Modoc, what may be Quapaw, what may be Ottawa. So when we have that support in place, when we have agencies that can support us with these, then that's a great thing. And with us switching territories, what was our original reservation land may not be where we're at now. We have some of that property back, but not all. So I do feel like it's important for us to work together to preserve every piece of history we can, and that's a key.
Annette, going kind of off of that, what would be the best way, do you think, to learn more? I know today you gave only a brief, very small portion of the history. Like you said, there's no way to tell all the history in an hour. But if people wanted to learn more about the Modoc tribe, and of course they can watch the documentary when that comes out. We're all excited about that. So is it okay to reach out to learn more about that history? I know there's probably books and things and articles written on it. But would it be best to contact the tribe and contact you to really know the history of the tribe?
Yes, that's one of my roles as well. We also have the library, which we are in charge of here at my building. But they've actually created the position of director of communication, and that I'm in charge of that. And so we have an email that is info@modocnation.com that you can go to, and that would be a great place for you to ask any questions. If people wanted resources or to find out more just what's going on, that would be a great place for them to reach out to ask specific questions. Our website's available too, and we are out there on social media like everybody else. We've got our Facebook page at Modoc Nation, and then we also do Instagram as well. And so they're really trying to get things out there, but we welcome people to ask questions, to try to get to know us, because the more people that know the story, the better.
I'll ask when we've got a question from OKPAN's executive director about if you would speak more about your position with Modoc Nation as director of education and culture and what that all entails. I know you wear many hats as part of that, but if you wouldn't mind speaking to that a little bit.
So director of education, it's kind of varied roles. One of the things that I'm super focused on right now is I'm the one who handles all of our scholarships for post-secondary ed. So within that, not just processing their scholarships, but trying to mentor with them to work through scheduling. Colleges have changed a lot in the way they advise students and things. And with my special ed background, that is something I really did, was work with the student one-on-one, got to know their strengths and their weaknesses, and how can we really focus on a successful system. And so that's what I still try to continue with our people here, is help guide them on a good path that's going to be emotionally good for them as well as academically strong. So I want them to know they can call and get that support. And when they have issues, we try to work through those and find a plan that can keep them in school, because the goal is that degree, but they also have life, they have family, they have situations that happen. And sometimes the things we have set in place doesn't work for them. So we want to work with our members so they can get that education and take care of their families and be so successful. So that's one piece. Another thing is I'm in charge of our summer youth camp. So, and that's focused on culture. But we've also been working in other things with CARES Act. People benefited in some ways from that, and we were able to spend money towards education. And some of the things we did was buy a lot of STEM equipment. And so our summer camps this year, half the day was focused on tribal culture and the other half was on a STEM activity. So we did STEM in the gym, we did water rockets, we did all kinds of things in the afternoon. So trying to work those pieces in, hooking the kids in as much as possible now so they understand what their connection to the tribe is. Because with the disconnect, that's what we see, is a lot of the adults really weren't connected because we didn't have activities going on in the tribe. Without having powwows and things, how do you come together? And like I said, it was more about financial survival. How do we keep going as a tribe not what can we put out there for fun to do. So now we're kind of going back to those activities of let's come together and just eat. Let's come together and cook. Let's come together and make something. And so little by little, that's starting to happen, but we're having to hit the kids first, and that's bringing in the adults. And as an educator, we know this. If we get the little ones, the big ones will come too sometimes. So it'll filtrate out. So that's another piece we do. Also for the education piece, because I do have that background in special education, we are able to support parents who have IEP needs. So we can be an advocate for that parent. We could go to meetings with them. We can help them work through their IEP and help them understand that. We can work with different things to support their accommodations and provide them different technology and things like that if they need that. We also provide some funding for special education students so they can get some extra supports they might not be able to get outside of that. So that's another thing we do. Within culture, that's a huge umbrella. So within culture, so I run the cultural camps. I have a monthly culture club meeting that we do that members can come join in. And so just kind of, we plan our events for the tribe together. Those are the people, that's my sounding board. So when I'm feeling like, oh, I'd like to do this, but I need tribal input, these are my members that come and I say, okay, as a member, what do you want to happen? You know, I'm the outsider at this point. What do you want? What do you want for your people? So basically, I'm just the person that facilitates. I let them make those decisions, and that's a really neat piece. And really letting people kind of find some different types of identity within that, and that's exciting. We also handle the church and cemetery. So we help with families as they need to plan a funeral service. We've had some services in our building, so we help that family if they need assistance with setting that up and things like that, helping them with finding their grave site and planning that burial as well. So a lot of different pieces come into play.
Thank you, Annette. It's been great to hear from you in your presentation. And I know everybody else has really and thoroughly enjoyed it. Is there last parting words before we cut off for today?
I think the biggest thing is, you know, this tribe's gone through so much, but their characteristics stay true. You know, they're people that have really persevered through a lot. They're very strong-minded people. They're very caring and loving people. They have a dry sense of humor at times, and they're a very quiet people. So lots of times when we're in a group, they shut down and get quiet. But that's not because they aren't caring and they aren't intelligent. It's because sometimes it's a trust issue. We often talk about generational trauma. You can still see that today in a lot of these people, but they're still fighting to survive. That perseverance is still there, and you know, we keep growing. So I think Modoc Nation's here. It's still growing, and watch out. Be looking for our movie and learn about us.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Annette. Everyone, thank you for being here. Our next Tribal Histories presentation will be on September 1st with the Delaware Nation. So again, thank you, everyone, and Annette again, and we'll see y'all later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.